fresh. And I want to start by unpacking a little bit of what we learned this week or didn't learn this week about the situation with Conor Benn. Conor Benn was in studio with Piers Morgan. It was, I believe, the first on-camera interview Ben has done since his fight against Chris Eubank Jr. was scrapped back in September in the wake of those 2 positive drug tests for clomiphene, which, for people that don't know, is a female fertility drug known to increase testosterone. It's the first interview since the WBC ruled that Ben could return to its rankings after the organization examined what was said to be 270 pages of evidence that Ben submitted. Now, this is a point that Piers Morgan came back to again and again. If Ben has all this evidence, why is he refusing to let the British Boxing Board of Control see it? All right, a few facts on this, Gareth, before I get your take on that interview. First, it goes without saying the WBC did not clear Conor Benn. What the WBC said was that there was no evidence that Ben intentionally ingested clomiphene and came to a conclusion that eggs could have caused the positive test. This conclusion is one that Ben himself does not really accept. He isn't even embracing that theory. He continues to blame the testers, which is kind of a time-honored tradition here in the U.S., and we'll get to that a little bit later. Second, the WBC ruling is effectively a toothless one. The WBC can rank Ben. It cannot license Ben. The British Boxing Board of Control is the governing body here, and until they say Ben can fight, no reputable board or athletic commission will license Conor Benn, including those in the U.S. I do not believe that states like California, Nevada, or New York will license a fighter without the British Boxing Board doing it first. Texas, maybe, because they're a little wild out there, but even them, I think they'd stay away from. The Middle East is likely the only place that Conor Benn can go to get a license and fight in the immediate future. So all that being said, Gareth, it was about a 20-minute interview or so with Piers Morgan. You've covered this story from start, and we're nowhere near the finish. Did you gain anything from the interview? Did you learn anything new in that interview?
Yeah, obviously Conor Benn has been through a very harrowing time. We don't wish mental illness on anyone through a process like that. He did very openly talk about how his mental health had suffered. Not surprisingly, felt like he was in the court of public opinion the whole time. But I think what we did learn, the biggest thing we learned, is he's not going to take his case to the Boxing Board of Control, the British Boxing Board of Control. And I think that's a shame, because in this whole process, I've spoken on countless times to Robert Smith, General Secretary of the Boxing Board of Control, who has just said, we are waiting for their evidence to come forward. We want to look at it. I don't think there's a vendetta against him. I do not think there is a personal vendetta against Conor Benn, but he seems to think there is. I think it's been ill-advised not to go to the Boxing Board of Control. Yes, they have strict liability in terms of that VADA test, which UKAD, the UK anti-doping body, have called on and have looked into. But I don't think they're looking to wreck his career. They're not looking to do that. So in many ways, that was the one thing that we learnt. But we also learnt, and it kind of came out in his statement before he went in front of this very high-profile interview. Everybody knows Piers Morgan. He's an extremely... It's like going and doing your interview with Oprah, isn't it? You know, I don't even need to say Winfrey. It's like going and doing it with Oprah, and you know, revealing all with Oprah. I think it's strange that statement came out that he wasn't accepting the exoneration from the WBC when they'd requested his nutritional program, and they'd found that maybe it was his egg intake, because they've obviously given that evidence to them. He's purely and utterly saying VADA have got it wrong. They got the testing, there were mistakes in the testing process. He's not accepting that clomiphene got into his system. And he's going to stand by that, it looks like, because he also said, I think drugs cheats should be banned for life. So he's taken his stance. Will that report ever be made public, for example, for us to see? He's got discrepancies, he's saying, over the actual VADA tests that were taken to what you assume would be a WADA lab, to be tested. So, to be honest, after the interview, it was no clearer in the whole situation that has lacked transparency because it's been behind lawyers the whole time. The Boxing Board of Control have barely said anything. UKAD have said nothing. VADA are saying nothing, and maybe they will, but why should they? They're just the testing process. And it was very unlikely that the WBC were not throwing VADA under the bus, but were going to break up VADA and say, they're hopeless or they're wrong, because that is a testing authority in the sport. Go back to the cradle of all of this, which we mustn't forget. There's drug testing for performance-enhancing drugs in boxing because it's an inherently dangerous sport. People can be legally killed in the ring, and therefore, when the Boxing Board of Control couldn't go through a hearing, maybe ahead of those July and September tests, or particularly the September tests, that they didn't do a hearing, they couldn't proceed with that fight with Chris Eubank Jr. And given how Chris Eubank Jr. was afterwards, taking nothing away from Liam Smith, to go into the big picture here, he looked so weight drained when he drained down to, what was it, 159 pounds, yep, or 57 pounds in that ghost weigh-in. Look how he went under against Liam Smith, taking nothing away from Liam Smith. But you look back and you instinctively think, thank God those two didn't step in the ring together, especially as clomiphene had shown up in his system in 2 VADA tests. So it's a complex and difficult case. And it's no clearer now than it was 5 months ago, frankly, Chris. I just don't. I mean, do you see it as any clearer now?
No, no, I don't. And look, you've been reporting on this from day one. Piers Morgan seemed genuinely befuddled as to why Conor Benn would share his, quote, evidence with the WBC and not the British Boxing Board of Control. Quite frankly, Gareth, I'm surprised it hasn't leaked. Like, the WBC is not the CIA. Like, I'm surprised that that report has not found its way to a media outlet at this point. But forget all that. Like, there was some crosstalk there during the interview when they brought Nigel Benn in, but it sure sounds like Nigel Benn wants that report out there too. Like, do you understand why Conor Benn will not release the report to the British Boxing Board of Control? Do you have any theories as to why he won't give that report to the British Boxing Board of Control?
Well, the WBC CARES program is not strict liability, and the VADA, Voluntary Anti-Doping Association tests going into the Eubank fight is under strict liability because of UKAD and Boxing Board of Control going into a fight. So that might be one of the reasons. I think he's obviously being advised by his legal team as to, he's not making the decisions. His legal team, I assume, are making the decisions and advising him. It feels ill-advised not to go in front of the Boxing Board of Control and just go through it and just go through the hearing with them and find a resolution with the case. I mean, that's what Piers Morgan pressed as much as possible. And the only answer that came in the end was, well, they can do one because they've got a vendetta against me. They had 7 charges against me, as he mentioned, 2 of which he mentioned, 2 of the charges he mentioned. That was upheld by the Boxing Board of Control. But as you say, as I said, they were acting under strict liability. So maybe the reason why the WBC, you say haven't leaked it, they're probably Mauricio Suleiman is a guy we know very well. He cooperates enormously with the media. He's a very shrewd businessman as well as president of the sanctioning body. They are arguably the most prevalent sanctioning body. You can call him a mover and a shaker. He's very involved. He talks to all of us in big fight weeks. And I wonder whether there is strict legalese over that they've signed an NDA or a strict policy NDA that they won't release it. But then you end up going round in circles because
You do.
because I don't want to say they gave him an out, but they gave him an exoneration to get back into the rankings, saying, look, it could have been caused from clomiphene, from eggs rather. Clomiphene could have been from the eggs. There were previous cases of cyclists, I think, were mentioned, 2 cyclists. So, but he doesn't want to take that because he doesn't want to believe that that's what it was, because he's adamant that it was down to what he's read into those VADA tests. But those VADA tests were at different times. And my understanding is that samples are split up anyway. So, it's nobody wins in this right now. And on the other note, yes, he might fight Manny Pacquiao. I think Eddie Hearn might well try and take that fight to America. I don't know if there is a tripartite agreement between the Boxing Board of Control and all the ABCs, the American Boxing Commissions.
The credible ones. I can tell you, the credible ones, he'd have to go to like Georgia or Florida or...
But it doesn't... But what I'm saying is there's a route there to have a fight, isn't there? It doesn't...
Maybe. I think more realistically it's the Middle East or some other foreign country that you take a fight like that to. Like, the real commissions in California, Nevada, and New York, they're not going to license him under these particular circumstances. I just don't believe that. And look, my read on it is, like, people listening to this show in the U.S. remember the Major League Baseball scandal, and they remember all the excuses that guys that got caught using substances came up with. I mean, I can go back 10 years to when Alex Rodriguez in New York City walked into Mike Francesa's radio studio, WFAN, the most powerful radio studio in New York, had a TV deal as well. And he sat there and he gave this impassioned speech about how the process was broken because then Major League Commissioner Bud Selig wouldn't come in to testify, which didn't make any sense whatsoever, why he would choose that hill to die on. It was all like, look over here, not over here. It was.
Yeah, I've got it up here now. I Googled it. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Give that a watch at some point. The other example that jumped to mind, Ryan Braun, who played for the Milwaukee Brewers. This was back in 2011. Ryan Braun got busted with a banned substance. He went after the test taker, who did not follow strict protocol because he took the test on a weekend. He couldn't ship it, or allegedly couldn't ship it. And he actually won his case because of that. But then 2 years later, Ryan Braun got caught again. And after that, subsequently, he apologized to the test taker for slandering him in the way that he did. The point of all this, Gareth, we've seen this before. Like, this is a familiar song to sports fans in the U.S. because we spent a decade plus dealing with it on a regular basis in Major League Baseball. It kept happening and happening and happening. And the excuses, even to laymen like you and me, never made any sense. They didn't quite add up. And that's where I feel this is going with Conor Benn. The British Boxing Board of Control is just not going to just, look the other way on this one. And legitimate states and their commissions are not just going to look the other way. That's why, and here was the only other question I had for you on this, because I don't really fully understand this. Like, Conor Benn, one way to get his reputation, his career back on track, I think, would be, look, I didn't do this. I don't know how this got in my system. The WB said it was eggs, whatever. Like, I'm falling on my sword here. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. I didn't take anything illegal.
But do the hearing. Do the hearing.
Yeah, no, like, do it. Like, fall on his sword in front of the Board of Control. Like, would the punishment be that severe?
I don't think so. I think you're so right. I think you're so right. And rather than just finding another area to go and fight in that will license him and then work your way back in that way. I think you're so right, and it makes absolute sense. That's why my feeling the whole time has been just do your case with the Boxing Board of Control. They're not going to ban you for life. You know, the Boxing Board of Control are not looking to wreck Conor Benn's career, in my view.